it gives me a pleasure to do an introduction to a person who brought me to this field, third sector. I mean, I am where I am because of the help and advice always from our main speaker today. He's always been a big inspiration to all of us, especially who has been working for third sector organizations like ELREC, Milan, and various other organizations. We always look up to him, and he's one person who is always available on the other side of the phone, doesn't matter what time it is. And every time he'll say, I'm too old to do anything, but he does everything more than we can do. I can say, David, we have more than 250 people on the screen just now. I'm just going to say a little bit about our speaker tonight. Obviously, I think everyone who is here, who is well aware of him, I've seen him on TV recently. He's been on every single TV channel, every single newspapers, fighting for our rights. And I personally salute him for that because he's been working really, really hard. Professor Emeritus Sir Geoff Palmer, OBE, arrived in London as an immigrant from Jamaica in 1955 to rejoin his mother, who left Jamaica in 1951. After leaving school in London in 1958, he worked and attended evening classes to improve his qualifications. He subsequently entered Leicester, Edinburgh, and Heriot University, where he gained BSc, PhD, and DSc degrees, respectively. Sir Geoff is a board member of various organizations. As I said, he's involved in every organization, and if I start giving you the names, I'll be here all night. He has published books on different subjects and has received various research, academic, and community awards. Professor Palmer is an honorary Freeman of Midlothian, Scotland, gained an OBE in 2003 and was knighted in 2014 for his contribution to science, charity, and human rights. He maintains charitable links with Jamaica. Professor Palmer has been part of the Windrush campaign. He's an advisor to the honours system in Scotland. He's a chair of Edinburgh Mela. I'm sure all of you in here have been to the Mela. And is a history advisor to Glasgow University, which is the first institution in the United Kingdom to state that because it has benefited significantly from Caribbean slavery, it will provide educational assistance to Caribbean students. The Scottish government has presented Sir Geoff Palmer as its champion of diversity and inclusion. He is also the honorary Consul General for Jamaica. So I would like to welcome Sir Geoff Palmer to start your speech. And as I said, I've grown up watching and hearing from you, and every time I hear you, there's always something exciting and new. So to you all, I present Sir Geoff Palmer.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you very much, Faisal, for that. And, you know, I thank everybody who's helped me over the years. So I've probably, I owe people because they've helped me more than I've helped them. But what I'm going to talk about tonight is something about, you know, climate change and racism. And I'm going to put it in a historical context. And I'm going to read a paragraph from a document which relates to a case in Edinburgh, which is called the Joseph Knight case. And this case was about 250 years ago. The point is that this case is very important because people have said that this case abolished slavery in Scotland. I don't think it did, because Joseph Knight wasn't a slave, he was a servant. But we will leave that for the time being. What I'm going to do is to read a paragraph from that case where the lawyers were trying to justify slavery in the Caribbean. And this is the paragraph, I'll read it. It says, Europeans, particularly the natives of the northern parts, such as Britain, are perfectly incapable of labor in the climates where sugar is produced. A Negro, if not overworked, can toil under the influence of a West India sun without impairing his health or shortening his life, whereas a native of this country cannot support labor in the same proportion for a month without certain destruction. Now that was written by somebody, a lawyer in Edinburgh, 250 years ago. And it's about climate. It's about the myth and the lie that Black people are framed for slavery. Black people can stand the sun. So that's why we can enslave them without any conscience. And therefore, what we had over 300 years or more is that Black people were taken from Africa, transported to the Caribbean under the law. British law actually said for a Black slave, which was a chattel slave, a slave has no right to life and was property. And we can see that in terms of when the slaves were emancipated in 1834, the government gave 20 million to the slave owners because the slaves were property and they were losing their property. And therefore, we had a slavery where human beings were designated property, beaten to death because they were Black, beaten to death under the myth that a European cannot, in fact, work in the sun. Now, what we have, and I can't go into the details of slavery, but if we look at the consequences of this slavery, what we have is, people planting sugarcane in enormous quantities over hundreds of years. We've got coffee being planted as well. We have cotton being planted as well. And how do we facilitate the production of these crops? We have to take down trees. So trees were cut down in the West Indies so that white people can plant the crops they wanted, for which could be sold for enormous amount of money. So therefore, it was Black lives didn't matter then. Now, what we have is, what effect did that have on the climate or the environment? Over the years, the soil was completely exhausted in terms of its nutrition. What we also have, the water system is affected. And what is interesting is that the original name for Jamaica, where I come from, the Arawak Indians, before Christopher Columbus went there over 500 years ago, the natives called Jamaica Examaica. And what Examaica means is a land of wood and water. A land of wood and water. And what did the slave owners did? They cut down the trees and they damaged the water system. Damage it in such a way that I think I was listening to a program, not long ago, where the Jamaica Prime Minister was talking about setting up a contract in order to improve the water supply. And they were going to put down new pipes. This is the land of wood and water. New pipes, because the pipes left by Britain, in 1962, were rotting. And it was going to cost something like about $25 million in order to do this. Now, we have this legacy of people being assigned to a climate situation on the basis of their color and also what we call their race. There is no scientific evidence that human beings are different races. The fact is that it's Kant and his colleagues decided that human beings are different races. There is no scientific justification. There's no evidence for this whatsoever. The point is, a lot of people have been killed over that concept. And this must stop. What we also have, if we look now more in general around the world, as opposed to using Jamaica as an example, and I'll finish with Jamaica because as a boy, I remember going to my bed one night as a boy. So we're talking about 70 years ago. And the wind came up and the wind blew. And I looked up and the roof of our house had gone. I was looking at the sky and it was raining. And my aunt came up and said, "Don't get out your bed, boy, because you go out in a hurricane, you will die." In fact, when the trees were removed, the slaves died because their housing condition was so much poorer than the slave owners that they were outside, no trees to protect them. And therefore, I was lucky as a boy at 10. I was in a house, but the roof had gone. And following that, we had polio session after that hurricane, and we didn't go to school for months. So therefore, the removal of our environment because of slavery based on racism put a lot of Caribbean islands in an awful economic position, which we must try and address. We, as I've often said, we cannot change the past, but we have the consequences of poverty. Now, if we look at the world as a whole, I've done a little biology and botany, so I know a little bit about photosynthesis. And what I'd like to say is our food supply is based on the climate. We need the sun, we need water, and we also need carbon dioxide. The irony is plants need carbon dioxide to produce starch and sugar. They need carbon dioxide, but we are producing more carbon dioxide than the trees need to feed us. The point is that this is something we have to manage. We have to manage it because I know a little bit about carbon dioxide. at high concentration, it is a poison. In companies where I know where there is high levels of CO2, they make sure that it goes down on the basement because it is heavier than air. And therefore, this is one of the, I was thinking this morning, an adult standing in CO2 could breathe well, but a child is in the CO2 to a greater degree because it's heavier than air. These are little things we don't think about, but could be important in terms of health of children. Now, if we look in general, CO2 as a whole, 80%, about over 80% of the CO2 that is produced by humans come from the richer countries. Over 80% come from the richer countries. If we also look at CO2 production over the last 100 years, my mother was born in 1916, my late mother was born in 1916. If we look at the CO2 when she was born in 1916, compared to 2020, it's about 100 times greater, the CO2. So somebody who looked after me had a different CO2 level to deal with than I have. And therefore, we cannot pass this on in the next 100 years. That is going to be another 100 times greater. We have to do something now. And as far as I'm concerned, the passage I read at the beginning, it is that passage that killed George Floyd. It is that passage, a passage where white people think that black people are suited to cut sugarcane, are suited to have poor living conditions, are suited to have a short lifespan, are suited to have COVID. The point is that the circumstances in which black people live in are produced by white people who do not have a regard for this planet we live in. It's self-serving greed, which must stop. And finally, what I would like to say is that we are one humanity on one planet. And therefore, we are living, we are the past of the future. We are the past of the future. And therefore, we have a responsibility to ensure that we do not pass on our greed and avarice. We're producing more CO2 than we should, and that we are taking down trees. And let's face it, without trees, humanity is gone from this planet. Trees keep us alive. And therefore, what I'm hoping, I'm 80 years of age, so the point is that I think for the young people, we have a responsibility to ensure that we pass this environment on in a manner that is respectful and respectful of life, the life of those in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Geoff. It was excellent. Now, I'm going to ask, I think we do have questions. David, you did say that, and I can see there is one, but if there isn't any, I would like to ask Ewan. Ewan, do you want to ask that question yourself? Can the host unmute Ewan, please?
There we are. There are so many
Yeah.
people on the call.
I'm trying to
Right.
find out.
I'll read the question. I can see it here. Ewan asked that question. He would like to. The question is: I would like to hear how Professor Palmer thinks we could usefully apply idea of reparation to the concept of climate justice, i.e., how can the West compensate the South without reinforcing undemocratic power structures? So Geoff, do you have the answer for that?
It's a summary. Is how can the West, sort of compensate for what, in fact, they've done
without reinforcing undemocratic power?
Well, I think that, the politics is important, and, politicians behave in certain ways. Now, we have the power because we elect them. We elect politicians, and therefore what politicians do is our fault. So we have ultimate responsibility for what a politician does. And therefore what we must look at are situations where it is not about reinforcing undemocratic powers. The point is that I used to say to my students, it's not a product of our race, we're the product of our geography. Geography is critical. We've found ourselves in different parts of the world. And therefore, what we must do as human beings is to ensure that if you get sugar from somewhere, or you get tea, or you get bauxite, or some of the minerals, that you should have a sense of responsibility or fairness, that you will try and redress that. I know that sometimes one is working against politicians who we think are unjust, but the overriding factor must be the people. And I think that even the worst undemocratic politician in the world will not stand in the way of organizations like the United Nations and other bodies that will say, you must stop doing that to your people, and we want this to be done. It's us, we can do it.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions? I think I can read a comment from, can everyone else see the chat list? Yeah, I can see one here. Sarah Boyak is with us as well. Sarah, do you want to come? Do you want to say anything, or do you have any questions? Because I can see you're suggesting that how can we build support for Geoff's one humanity, one planet concept. Is there anybody who's got any suggestions or any questions, or anybody wants to say anything on this?
What do you think, Sir Geoff?
Well, when I sit and I think about it daily, and I realize that one of the aspects which the slavers used in order to try and separate us as people, one concept was, the earlier concept of race was we were different species. We were different species. But you see, that didn't work, because all human beings, we are interfertile. We produce offsprings which are fertile. And that, the races then, you're talking about humankind. It didn't work. We're a different species. Because nature says all human beings can interbreed and produce viable offsprings, which are also fertile. And therefore they changed it to race. And therefore it is human beings that have tried to divide us. Human beings for, private and selfish reasons. And in the 1960s, when I was in London, 1960s, one of the politicians actually said, in order to win an election, how would you like your little blonde daughter to bring home a big black man? And that he was playing on the fears, because think of it, blonde daughter with a black man, all the racism of 200 years. And he won the seat. So therefore, racism, we think we can manage it, but when confronted by it, we may not be able to. And therefore, we've got to get the concept we're one humanity and really believe it. And make sure that when we hear somebody next to us, politician or otherwise, making innuendos about race, we just say, I don't want to know. That to me would be a first start, because we have racism in the interview room. We have racism in our decisions that we make, and we have got to get rid of it. In fact, on my road, when I came here in 1977, a little girl came up to me and she said, do you know, sir, my dad said, you are going to reduce our house prices. Because then, if a black person moved next to you, then another white person won't want to live next to you. So these are things we've lived through, and we may have those subconsciously. And what we want to do is to ensure that our politicians change the laws that ensure that people's rights are respected. Nature is not racist. People are racist.
I have a question for you here. I think it's from David. It says, is there one writer or one book which you would recommend to our audience?
Well, I'm not that well read. And I think that, I think the public, there's a lot of, books around, but I think the media in this crisis, both with COVID and with George Floyd crucifixion, the media has been very good. And I would advise, read the media, look at the media, see what people are saying, because you'll be surprised how much I've learned by listening and looking at what some people are saying. Like we've got the plaque in Edinburgh and we're trying to get this new plaque, and we have a group of people trying to stop it. And I was horrified at some of the people who are trying to do this. You can't get that from a book. Life to me is looking at what we're doing at the moment, and then get involved and make your voice heard. Because the little support, one Twitter support to me is significant, because it allows me to ignore the masses